Right.
Um, that's Vav Aleph.
Yeah, 15 Aleph, yeah.
Okay. There are knots for which we are liable. The camel drive is not, the sail is not. And just as one is liable for tying them, so too one is liable for untying them. Reb Meir said, any knot which one can untie with one hand, we are not liable for. There are knots for which we are not liable, as we are for the camel driver's knot and the sailor's knot. A woman may tie the opening of a chemise, strings of a hairnet or a girdle, straps of a shoe or a sandal, canteens of wine or oil, or a pot of meat. Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov says we may tie a rope in front of an animal in order that it not go out. We may tie a pail with a belt, but not with a rope. But Reb Yehuda permits it. Reb Yehuda stated a general rule: any knot which is not permanent, we are not liable for. We may fold garments even 4 or 5 times, and we may make beds on the night of the Shabbos for the Sabbath, but not on the Sabbath for the night after Sabbath. Rabbi Ishmael says we may fold garments and make beds on Yom Kippur, and for the Shabbos and fats of the Sabbath sacrifices may be offered on Yom Kippur. Rabbi Kiva says neither of those of the Shabbos may be offered on Yom Kippur, nor may those of Yom Kippur be offered on Shabbos. Okay.
Okay. All right, Perik Tesayin.
I, there's
Cool.
one more. There's one more. Right. That's fine.
No, no,
All books of
this
holy.
is me now. This is me now.
You sure?
Yeah.
I thought
The
I
previous
thought
Perik was exactly three
you're
Mishnayos.
right. You're right. You're right. Okay. This time you're right. Okay.
This time. Occasionally. Occasionally. Um, Kol Kisvei HaKodesh Matzilin Osan Mipnei Adleka. Okay, so just a little bit of background over here. Um, there's this is coming by way of introducing the fact that if Chas v'Shalom a fire breaks out in a house on Shabbos, um, so you're not allowed to put it out unless there's a case of pikuach nefesh. Right. So dealing with a situation where there's no pikuach nefesh and a fire has started in the house, and like it's just at the moment it's just like in a corner of the house, but you're worried it's going to spread.
Right.
Um,
Right.
he looks. Chazal said a person is gets very verhitzt about the fact that his property is about to get burned, and so they said, you know what? We're actually not going to allow you to save anything you want from this fire, because if a person is it just forgets is in the mindset of I've got to save everything from the fire, then what's he going to do? He's going to extinguish the fire.
Right. Right.
Okay. And we don't want him to do that. So therefore, they put some restrictions in place about what you can save, so that as soon as the fire, as soon as the fire starts, he's in the mindset of saying, "Oh, wait, halacha, what am I allowed to save?" And yeah, then in once I'm thinking, "Oh, halacha, why am I thinking what am I allowed to save? Because it's Shabbos and I mustn't put out this fire." Okay, so he's got very restricted options about what to do about the fire. And I think, just in terms of practical halacha nowadays, I think because, people live in such close proximity to each other and the risk of fire spreading to places. I mean,
Right.
personally, if I'm paskening this, I'm going to say any fire inside a house is a safek pikuach nefesh. Um, if something spreads like this, you just don't want to get into that kind of shaila, and I'm gonna be machmir on pikuach nefesh in this situation.
Right.
But at any rate, let's say we're dealing with an isolated situation where you've got a house standing alone on the top of a hill, and nobody else is going to get hurt. And now the fire breaks out, and he knows that everyone in the house is safe. So now he's got all the only question he's got is about his property. So let's just confine it to that situation and not ask questions about pikuach nefesh, about the neighbors
Right.
and stuff like that. Okay. Um, so now, what is he allowed to say? Kol Kisvei HaKodesh, anything, any holy writings, whether it's a Sefer Torah, whether it's scrolls of Nevi'im, he is
Mm.
allowed to save them from the fire. Bein shekorin bahin, bein she'orin korin bahin. Whether it's something that you normally read from on a Shabbos day, so let's say he's got a personal Sefer Torah at home that he would be allowed to read, or things that you cannot read on Shabbos. Now, what can't you read on Shabbos? Actually, Chazal there's an interesting little social observation over here that when that on Shabbos they would obviously get together in the basic Knesset, and the Rav would get up and give Musar and give a drasha, and like people would come together to hear the important words of the Rav. Um, and what they saw for some, was that people were, who had Kisvei Tanakh would sit at home reading these things because they're interesting. Have you ever read Tanakh? It's interesting stuff in Tanakh,
Yeah.
and it's a good read, and people weren't turning up for the drashas. So Chazal said during the time of the drasha, you're not allowed to read. You're not allowed to read of him. You must come to shul, basically. So that's what we're touching
All
on
right.
Ben and Korin Bahen. Um, so um, okay, so that's all Kisvei Kodesh may be saved. But Afal
Yeah.
Pi Shekesuvim B'chol Lashon to Anim Geniza. And whatever language they're written in, they could be translated into English. You could have an art scroll or an Aryeh Kaplan Living Torah, which is purely in English, and
Right.
you would still be allowed to save it. Okay, and if they get damaged, they need to be put in Geniza.
Yeah.
Okay, mipnei ma ein korin bahem. Why can you not read? Can you not read for them? Mipnei bittul beis hamidrash. So that's what I was just talking about people
Right.
not coming to shul. Okay, now matilin tik hasefer im hasefer. And while you're saving the sefer, you're allowed to take the casing as well. You don't have to open the case and take the sefer out because I'm not allowed to save the case. You save the case. Okay. V'tik tefillin ima tefillin, and your bag of tefillin you don't, right? Whatever is used is used to carry it is fine. But al pi sheyesh b'sochan maos. So maybe you're storing money inside there, which is muktzah. No, you don't worry about that. You pick up the tefillin, get
Right.
out of there, and take it. You don't have to like open it up and take only the tefillin out. Lahechan matzilin osan, and what can you use as a place to store them safely? Lemavoy she'enu mefulash. You can take it out into an alleyway that's a cul-de-sac. In other words, it isn't a public thoroughfare. Uh,
Uh-huh.
so even if you don't have a sheet of mavos, even if you don't have that erev chatzeros or whatever between them, normally you would not be allowed to carry out into there. But because it's suitable for a sheet of mavos, you uh,
Right.
you can even carry it into there because this is now extenuating circumstances, and Chazal permitted the person to carry holy writings into these places to save them because they're holy writings. And Ben Becerra goes further. He says, "Aflam mafulash," even if it's an alley that's open and on both ends, and people can use it as a public thoroughfare, even though obviously it's not a technical rishus harabim. It's still just a mavoy it's a private mavoy. But even so, says Ben Becerra, you'd be allowed to carry it into there, but the halacha does not follow him. Okay. Now, after Kisvei Kodesh, we also talk about food. Matzilin mazon shalosh sudas. He's allowed to save enough food for 3 meals because a person has to have 3 meals on Shabbos. So he's allowed to save 3 meals worth of food and take them out and take them outside to save from the fire. Hara'oi la'adam la'adam. However many people he's got in his household, he must take out, and if he's got animals as well, hara'oi la'beim la'beima. And if he needs to take out enough food to feed his animals for the Shabbos. Keitzad, how can you do it? Nafla deleka b'leila Shabbos. If the fire broke out on Friday night, matilin mazon shalosh sudos, then you can save 3 meals. B'shafris, matilin mazon shtei sudos. B'mincha mazon soda achas. Only as much as he needs for the rest of Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi goes further, says the Olam Matzilin Mazon Shalosh Sudas. He can always save three meals. Now I'm not going to break too much because Mishnah Gimel is a follow-on from Mishnah Base, and there's some important context that has to be added. Matzilin Sal Malek Karos Afal Pi Sheyesh Bo Mea Sudos. So if he's got a basket of bread, and it's going to be quicker for him to grab the whole basket than to grab, how much,
Right.
like the three bread rolls or whatever that he needs to take out for his meal. Then let him grab the basket rather. Okay.
Mhm.
The eagle shall devela, and he can take the entire pressed fig cake. Like he's never going to be able to eat through one fig one. It's a big thing. He's not going to eat that whole thing on Shabbos, but he doesn't have to break out of it only as much as he needs for the Shabbos. Just grab the whole thing and to take it out. But chavis shel yain, and a whole flask of wine. But if it's a barrel of wine or whatever, however much he needs for his meals, he's allowed to take out. V'omer la'acherim, and what's more, he can call on his neighbors to come and help him take food out the house. Bo'u v'hatzilu lachem. Basically, what he does is he's mafkir all of his food that's left over, and says to
Right.
his neighbors, come and take. And the neighbors don't have the same restriction that he does because it's not their property. So they're not going to be thinking, oh, I'm going to I'm going to put out the.
Right.
So they have no restrictions on how much food they can take out for themselves. So they can go in and grab. And if they're smart, and what the Gemara touches on this is that they are a Shemayim.
Yeah.
That they look at this and say he's declaring it hefker, but he wouldn't be declaring it hefker unless he was under duress. So what do? Osinemo cheshbon achar Shabbos. They come back to him after Shabbos, and either they pay him for the stuff that they took, or else they give it back to him as a gift,
Uh-huh.
so
Okay.
that he shouldn't lose out. Lahechan matzilin osan. And now this is the important point why I didn't want to break at the end of Mishnah Base, is that there's a distinction between the holy writings and the food, that he cannot just take them out into a place that doesn't have an eruv. Lechatzer ha'ma'oreves, he has to take it out into a chatzer that has an eruv. Um, so he's not allowed to violate the regular laws of Shabbos to take his food out. Ben Beseru Omer af l'she'ena ma'oreves. So again, Ben Beseru is more makil than the rest of Chachamim, and says, look, you don't need to have an eruv. But he's also more machmir, that he doesn't allow you to take it into a mavoi, only into a chatzer that's in between the houses. Um,
If
even
there was
even
if
if
there was
they
no error, there was no Arab there, and well, assuming he can't take the scrolls out. He can't take any of
well, but so that's what the majority opinion is that he cannot take the things out if there's no eruv. But remember the Sefer Torah, he's allowed to take out even though there's no eruv.
right. Okay. All right. And Pekuach Nefesh doesn't come into Arab or not, doesn't matter. You can
What?
take someone out. And Pekuach Nefesh doesn't come into play over here. No
Nefesh,
Arab, they come
never,
out. Right.
then all rules are off. Okay,
Right.
once we're talking about pikuach nefesh, we can go and extinguish the fire. Okay, but so we're talking a case where there's no pikuach nefesh, and we're worried about is making sure that nobody goes and extinguishes the fire.
Right.
Okay, and that's it.
Then it says, others come and say with me. At the end it says, yeah.
Hmm?
No, that was a different one. No, forget it.
Yeah.
Okay, I got confused. Okay, now we're going to now Yud Aleph Gimel. One who throws an article at a distance of 4 cubits against a wall above 10 tefachim from the ground, it is as though he is throwing it in the air. Below 10 from the ground, it is as though he is throwing it on the ground. One who throws an article at a distance of 4 amos on the 4 amos on the ground is liable. One who threw it to a point within 4 cubits, but it rolled beyond 4, he is exempt. If he threw beyond 4 and it rolled back to within 4, he is liable. One who throws a distance of 4 amos in the sea is exempt. If there was a shallow pool of muddy water with a public domain passing through it, one who throws a distance of 4 amos is liable. How much is a shallow pool? Less than 10 tefachim. A shallow pool with a public domain passing through it, one who throws a distance of 4 amos is liable. One who throws from the sea to the dry land, from the dry land to the sea, from the sea to the ship, from the ship to the sea, or from one ship to another is exempt. If the ships are tied together, we may move things from one to the other. If they are not tied together, even though they are close to each other, we may not move things from one to the other. According to the ships that are tied together, there must be an Arab, though, there for them to move from one ship to the other.
That's
Right?
what I'm saying, yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. Okay. Bakorum. Gimel Hay. No. Gimel Yod. Right. Basically, right. Truma Maisa is like Bakorum in 2 ways, and like Truma in 2 ways. And they be taken from the clean, from the unclean, and from that which is not nearby, like Bakorum. But it renders forbidden the threshing floor and has prescribed quantity like Truma. The etrog is like a tree in many ways, and like vegetables in another way. It is like a tree regarding Orla, Revi, and the 7th year. And like vegetables in one way, in that its tithing is at the end of the time of the gathering, and so Rev Gamil. But Eliezer says it is like a tree in all things. The blood of bipeds is like the blood of animals, in that it renders seeds susceptible, and one is not liable on account of creeping things.
Okay. Shemos. Gimel Aleph.
If one separated a cucumber as truma, it is found to be bitter, a melon, and it is found to be rotten, it is truma, but he must give truma again. If one separated a jar of wine and was found to have turned it into vinegar, if it is known that it turned into vinegar before truma was taken, it is not truma. But if it turned into vinegar after he gave truma, it is truma. If it is in doubt, it is truma, then he must give truma again. The first one does not render itself a duma, and one is not liable to the added fifth, and so too is it is with the second. If one of them fell into chulin, it does not render to meduma. If the second one fell into another place, it does not render it meduma. If both fell in the same place, they render it meduma according to the smaller of the two. If partners separated truma one after another, Rabbi Akiva says the truma of both of them is truma, but the Chachamim say the truma of the first is truma, and Rabbi Yossi says if the first gave the prescribed amount, the truma of the second is not truma. But if the first did not give the prescribed amount, the truma of it the second is truma. Okay. Okay. The Horos. Okay. Vav Chet. A basilica is a private domain for Shabbos, but a public domain for Tuma. Rabbi Yehuda says if he stands at this entrance and sees those who enter and those who leave at the other entrance, it is a private domain for this and for that. But if not, it is a private domain for the Sabbath and a public domain for Tuma. A paran is a private domain for the Sabbath and a public domain for Tuma. And similarly, the sides of the paran, the mayor says, and the sides of the paran, Rameya says private domain in regard to the laws of the Sabbath, but a public domain in regard to the laws of Tumah.
Just a second. Did you skip a page or something? Because Rabbi Meir is saying the sides are Rishus HaYachid for both.
Yeah, I did skip a page. I'm sorry. Rameya says the sides of a private domain for this and for that. The storefront bench area is a private domain for the Sabbath, the public for Tumah. A courtyard which the public enters on one side and exits on the other side is a private domain in regard to the laws of Shabbos, but not a public domain in regard to the laws of Tuma. Okay. A potter who put down his pots and went down and drink.
We're done there.
We're done? Okay.
Menachos.
Okay. Hey. The first of the first is the most superior. The second of the first and the first of the second are equal. The third of the first, the second of the second, and the first of the third are equal. The third of the second and the second of the third are equal, and the third of the third is the most inferior. One could deduce that the mincha offering should require pure olive oil. If the menorah, which is not for consumption, requires pure olive oil, surely the mincha offerings, which are consumption, should require pure olive oil. Therefore, Scripture teaches pure beaten for the light, but not pure beaten for the mincha offerings. And from where did they bring the wine? Jerusalem and Atulim are the preferred areas for wine. Second to them are Beit Rima and Bet Lavan in the highland, and Kephar Signa in the valley. All lands are valid, but they would bring from these. We do not bring either from a fertilized field or an irrigated field, and from those vines between which vegetation grew, but if one brought, it is valid. We do not bring from Elliston wine, but if it brought, it is valid. If we not bring from old wine, these are the words of Rebbe, but the comments declare it fit. If we do not bring either sweetened wine or smoked or cooked, if one brought, it is invalid. If we do not bring from Espelaz, but only from trailing vines and from well-cultivated vineyards. They did not store it in large class, but rather in small barrels, and one does not fill the barrel to its rim so that it should be aromatic. One does not bring from its mouth because of the mold, nor from the bottom because of the sediment. Rather, one brings from the middle third and from its middle. How does he check? The treasurer sits with the reed in his hand. When it excluded the vein of sediment, he struck the reed. Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda says, wine in which mold developed is unfit, and it is stated, unblemished they shall be for you, and the milk offerings unblemished they shall be for you, and their libation. Okay. Revocation of the Dharma is valid the entire day. The fact can be lenient or stringent. How? If she made a netter on the night of Shabbos, he can revoke it during the night of Shabbos, or on the Sabbath day before nightfall. If she vowed just before dark, he must revoke it before nightfall, for it became dark and he had not revoked it, he can no longer revoke it. These are the term that he can revoke. Those that involve self-denial, if I bathe or if I do not bathe, if I adore myself or do not adore myself, Rabbi Yossi said, these are not in the dorm of the self-denial. These are in the dorm of self-denial. If she said, Kohanam, the fruits of the world to me, he may revoke it. Kohanam, the fruits of this country, he can bring her fruit from another country. Kohanam, the fruits of the storekeeper to me, he cannot revoke it. But if he was the only source for his provisions, he can revoke it. And these are the words of Rabbi Yossi.
All
right.